I definitely have some issues with this pedal, but that's largely because I'm a big nerd. Hey, I'm Kai Down, and this is going to be my demo of the Flamma FX200B. This demo is sponsored, as Flamma sent me this one out for review, but I will do my best to keep this impartial and unbiased. Before we do anything, I need to tune the guitar, which is a great time to show you the tuner. You can access this by pressing the two middle foot switches down at the same time. Now the graphics aren't exactly pretty on this tuner, and it does seem very sort of rudimentary clip art style, but it functions really nicely. It has a nice fast reaction time to it, and it seems to be pretty smooth. Before we get into any tones, let's do a quick overview of the unit. Of course, on the front panel, you've got an expression pedal, you've got the value knob, which is also a push button, you've got the master volume control, and you've got 4 different foot switches. The first 2 foot switches are going to be banking up and down to change between your presets, and the second 2 foot switches are going to choose which of the presets you want to access from the bank. Let's quickly show you how that one works. You've got 160 different effects that you can choose from. You've got 58 amps, 30 different cabinet blocks, and 50 slots for user IRs. You've got an aux input, you've got an expression pedal or external foot switch control, you've got a mono guitar input, a mono effects loop, you've got a stereo output with 1/4 inch jacks, and you've also got a stereo output with XLRs. There's a headphone output, a ground lift, you've got your power in, which is going to be mainly for charging, you've got your USB, which is going to be for the desktop editor, which I'll touch on slightly later on in the video. And one other thing that I quite like about this pedal is that you've actually got proper MIDI in and out. These full MIDI jacks aren't really something you see all that often on more budget sort of modelers. We've got a touch screen on the unit, which I really think does boost the sort of user experience as a whole, makes it 10 times easier to learn than something with just normal rotary encoders. So to quickly run you through the effects on the edit page, we've got effects, which is going to be sort of compressors, wahs, filters, talk boxes, that sort of stuff. We've got the overdrive block, which is going to be overdrives, boosts, distortions, and fuzzes. So we've got all sorts of things like the smooth boost, we've got the dark rat, the metal zone, metal master, all the way up to things like the round fuzz, which is going to be the fuzz face. I did find the modulation block to be a little bit lacking in effects, but we'll go through those anyway. We've got a couple of choruses, a couple of flanges, we've got quite a few different phasers, a vibrato, rotary effect, tremolo, then things like the slow gear and things like the poly pitch block. We've got a few different delays to choose from analog, tape, mod, ping pong, things like that. The reverbs were another one that were a little bit pedestrian, especially when I was dialing in more experimental sounds like shoegazy sorts of stuff. We've got, as far as experimental stuff goes, the most experimental it gets is really the modulated reverb, which is a very standard staple thing. So they did keep it very simple with the amount of effects they have on the unit and what those effects are. So what I want to do now is build my own preset. I'm going to go for a chunky metal preset. I'll press one of these bank presets and then scroll through the list until I find the empty slots, and then press one of the A or B to enter that preset. So now we've got a completely blank DI tone. Let's start by adding a cabinet to this before we add the amp, because an amp on its own sounds pretty horrible. To access the edit screen, we just tap the screen here and then it pulls up the whole signal chain. Then we can tap on the cabinet, tap on the list, and then you can scroll through and select whichever cabinet you want. I'm going to pick the Archean 4x12. We're now going to add an amp model. I found that the amps in this are somewhat varied in quality, so we'll scroll through the list a little bit using the rotary encoder until we find one that we like. I'm enjoying that amp, but we are getting a little bit of hiss, so now would be a good time to engage the noise gate. You've got three different options for the noise gate. You've got a suppressor, a reducer, and a gate. I quite like the idea of the reducer as it doesn't cut into your tone too much. We're going to turn it up just enough to shelve off some of that noise. Okay, I am now going to try it with an overdrive. I don't think this amp needs it, but we'll have a look through the list and see what it's like. I'm thinking the Screamer 808 as a classic overdrive in the Tube Screamer settings. That should do us quite nicely. Yeah, so that actually did tighten up the amp quite nicely and gave us a little bit more extra saturation, which I'm quite liking. I'm now going to set up the foot switch to control some delay and reverb for the lead tone. So we head into the 4 square menu, which is going to be our settings for the parameters on the preset. Then under the foot switch, we go to control, and then we choose whichever effects that we want to control with the foot switch, which I'm going to go for reverb and delay. So now when I press the foot switch, it's going to engage just the reverb and the delay of this preset. You will notice there is something of an ugly delay when you switch effects on and off, and also when you're switching presets. This is because they're not all loaded to the DSP at the same time. You can see the DSP meter at the top changes as I add and remove these effects from the preset. With the delays set to the subdivision of a quarter note, we can now tap and hold the foot switch and then it will switch to tap tempo mode. I also want to try and set up a wah on this preset to show you how the expression pedal works, though with it being up on the stool like this, it's not going to be a great demo of the wah itself. So we'll head into the effects block, which is the first block here, and then under this drop down menu we'll select 535 Cry, which is going to be a Crybaby style wah. We'll turn it on, we'll set the Q quite high and the peak sort of to the middle, I guess, and then we'll back out of that and back into this sort of controlling the preset menu with the 4 squares. Under pedal, we're going to select pedal 1, expression. For the effects, we now want to select the drop down and go for position. Set the minimum to be 0 and the maximum to be 100. And now, when we've got the wah open, the expression pedal will control the position. We can also add a quick modulation to this tone just to really round it out. I think I'm going to go for a tri-chorus. I quite like this one. It's very 80s, very cool. One other thing that I get asked about quite a lot when I'm demoing these pedals is how well does the pitch shifting perform. So we're going to add a polyphonic pitch shifting block at the start of the chain, set it down to 4 semitones down, and hear how it works. With our preset complete, we can save it using the floppy disk icon. I'm just going to leave it as empty for now, but we will save it so that we can come back to it later. I'd say the UI of the unit is very easy to master for creating a preset. It didn't take me very long at all. I pretty much opened this pedal up yesterday, so I've already got the hang of it, and I may be something of a tech wizard, I guess, but I think a lot of people will get to grips with this unit very quickly. As far as the actual user experience goes, I think most of it's pretty snappy. Some of the scrolling through the menus and that can be a little bit sluggish at times, and it can be quite tricky to get the exact pinpointed spot that you want with your finger, but that's where the rotary encoder comes in. So let's get into some pros and cons of the unit. Firstly, I have to say it looks great. This is a really nice looking modeler. The screen's really nice and bright, the colour is perfect for a modeler, and it's not something you see very often at all. Having it powered by a battery is also a really nice feature for a modeler like this, as it makes it far more portable than something else. So like the HX Stomp for instance, if you wanted that to be rechargeable, you'd have to get a dedicated rechargeable power supply and all of the conversions necessary to get it to run with the Stomp, which can be a bit of a hassle. This is pretty much just grab and go. I'd say this is a great all-in-one solution. A lot of the amp models actually sound really good, despite some cons that I'll get into later on. The I/O is just right for a pedal of this form factor. I think they really nailed that part of it. Especially the real MIDI control. That's something that I really appreciate. The desktop app is very easy to use, very snappy, and I really like how it works. Lastly, for the pros, I do have to shout out the tuner. I actually really like this one. Okay, for the cons. I think the amp models are more profiles than actual models. So rather than something like the Line 6 Helix where you've got faithful recreations of every control on the amp, they've sort of dumbed it down to be just bass, middle, treble, presence and gain, as well as a master control for each of the amps. This makes it not react like the real amp would, so you don't get the full sweep of gain, for instance, on something like the Orange model. However, I don't think this is too much of an issue, as a lot of people using this unit aren't going for realism, they're just going for good tones. Which ultimately, at the end of the day, is what's more important, right? I think these stock cabinets are something of a weak point in this unit, as you don't have any control over the mic placement, the mic choice, or anything like that. It is literally just whatever cab you choose is the cab you get, and that's that. This can be expanded upon with user IRs, but I don't think it should be a necessity to be able to do that just to be able to change the position of the microphone. Lastly, for the cons, I think the gap switching is going to be something of an issue for a lot of players. It's not an unnoticeable gap like I had with the Hotone Ampero Mini. This is quite a strong gap. it's time for the conclusion. I definitely have some issues with this pedal, but that's largely because I'm a big nerd. I do think this could be perfect for someone else's use cases and their needs. I think the launch price may be slightly too high for this one, as it's sitting somewhere around the £345 mark, which puts it dangerously close to something like the Podgo, which I think is a much more established and more trusted unit. I still think this is a viable option though, especially if you need a portable modelling solution, as the battery power on this is just impossible to beat. You can literally just plug in your guitar and a set of headphones and you'll be good to go. So that is everything that I've got for this demo. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to check out a demo of another modeler I did recently, the Hotone Ampero Mini, I'll leave a link on screen for you to do so. That's all for this one. I've been Kai.